Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cabinet Vision Guy. In today's episode we're going to continue our series on rendering and we're going to take a look at materials and textures because these play a huge role in making a realistic render. I'm going to start off showing you how we import a texture into Cabinet Vision and then assign that to the material and a couple of different properties we can set on the texture as well. And then what we'll do is we'll take a look at a job and I'll show you a few different places where we can actually edit the textures and modify the textures on some of the parts and assemblies that we see. So to get to my textures and start to import or modify the textures that I've got in my system, what I need to do is just head to the welcome screen and then open up the material manager. And then from here, up at the top, I can access my textures, but I can also access my finish types and finishes as well, which we're going to touch on slightly in this video. So to import a texture in, what I need to do is head into textures, go into the section where I want to import. So I'm going to go into my wood section here. And then I can create a new texture up at the top, and then I can use this little icon here to load an image from a file, and I'm just going to open this now. Down at the bottom we can select the type of texture, so we support a bitmap and a JPEG as well. Now the question that I'm asked quite a lot is what makes a good texture for rendering versus a bad texture. So I've just put together a couple of examples to try and show the differences in texture and what I'd be choosing when I'm actually looking for a texture to import into CV. So this really depends on what you intend to do with the texture. There's a couple of different ways we can display a texture inside CV, and we're going to look at that in a second. But we can either stretch the texture to cover the entire part or material, or we can choose to tile that texture at a set size, which is called a world height and width. If we're choosing a texture that we're going to import in and then stretch over the entire material, what we need to do is make sure that we've got enough sort of material in that texture itself that it looks realistic when we stretch it out to be covering, say, a large end panel. So we've got two textures here that we can see, and you'll see that I've got a bad texture and what I'd class is a good texture. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open these up in Paint so we can see them properly. So in the bad texture, you'll notice that it is quite a nice texture in the fact that we can see a lot of grain in there, looks really nice, but the actual image itself is only covering a small amount of the material. So when we actually start to stretch this out, we're going to see obviously quite a large knot that's going to appear on several different items that we render. Now if we take a look at what I class as a good texture, you'll see that we see a lot more grain in this and a lot more of the sheet of the material itself, so it's going to look in proportion to the rest of the room and the design that we're working on. So I'm just back in the material manager and I'm going to continue with our import of our good texture. So once I've opened the texture, then what I need to do is I need to give it a name, and then what I can also do is give it a description as well, and then I need to set the properties of the texture itself. So if I don't want to stretch this texture out over sort of the entirety of the material or parts that I'm going to be covering, what I need to do is I need to hit the option to tile the texture, and at that point I can then give it a world height and a world width. So this would be applicable more for if we're doing sort of a tiled floor, for instance. Now the type of texture that we'd use in this particular situation, and I'm just going to switch to a browser to show you this one, is we'd have to have a what we call a seamless texture, and that's a texture that can be repeated over and over again to make up a complete pattern. If we look at some examples here of sort of some non-seamless textures and what they look like once they're tiled, you'll see on this one, for instance, we can see a repeat of the texture and it gives us the grid view. So it's always worth making sure that when we are importing a texture and we do want to tile that at a certain size, we make sure it's going to be a seamless texture and then it'll give a more realistic effect on the render. So I'm going to make sure I'm unticking this for my particular texture here because we do want it to stretch. Now if I was bringing in a wood texture that was a really large resolution, sort of a shot of a full sheet almost, what I might want to do is hit tile and then input my sheet size to force that sort of perspective with the texture. Now there is one more option that I need to make sure that I've got ticked on this texture, and that's decal. And you might notice in the background I've got a few more textures here that I've previously imported, and these are actually black and white images of a wood grain. Now with this option unticked, what happens with this is what Cabinet Vision does is it blends this particular texture with whatever finish color we're also applying to that material as well. And that gives us a blended texture. This is really good if we're working with something like a sprayed material where we might start off with one wood grain and then alter the finished color to represent the different spray that we're applying to it. But for us, I'm going to make sure that I've got decal ticked and I'm going to hit OK. And with my texture now imported, I need to now assign this to a specific material. And there's a couple of different ways of setting up textures on your materials. I'm just going to take you through both. So if I head into sheet materials and I'm going to pick out MFC. So to actually apply this texture, all we need to do is pick out the material where we want to apply it, head to texture, then click in here and essentially just choose our texture and assign it. And then every time we render this material, it's obviously going to use the texture that we've chosen. Now what we might want to do is we might want to be able to decide the texture of a material on job level or in a room essentially. And what we can do with that, if we just hit this to open up and select our texture, what we can do is we can set this to automatic. And at that point, what will happen is when we come to render a room, and I'll show you in a second, we can then choose the texture for the material and it will update. So if you're using a sprayed finish again, this can be really useful for just being able to quickly change the textures, or even if you're just using Cabinet Vision from a design perspective and you want to be able to quickly change the textures for your assembly exterior and interior, it can be quite cool to set it up as automatic. On this material, if I wanted to set the front texture, I'd just simply select it here. And then what I can do is I can specify the texture that's going to appear for the front, the back, the edge and the end of the material as well. So again, if you've got different materials that might have a different texture on the edge, something like a plywood, you can also choose to apply that here. So typically what I do is just run through and assign my textures and then put that into a material schedule. And then obviously I can begin to render it with it on room level. So we're going to switch across to room level now for a second and take a look at a design. And in this design, we've got two assemblies set up that are using two different types of material. The assembly has a material on the left with a fixed texture, and the assembly on the right has a material with an automatic texture. So I'm going to start off by taking you through how we go about modifying the material with the fixed texture. And because this material has the texture fixed to it, we actually need to modify the material itself. And I can do that on room level by going to properties and then materials. And then I can find from all the available materials within my job, my specific material that I'm using, so it'll be an English oak. And from here, I can choose to then modify the texture. I can also modify the color and the finish type from here as well, which is again, really useful when we modify materials. From here, if I then want to modify an individual part with a fixed material, what I can do is just head down to assembly level. And I'm going to go into edit, into 3D. And if I select one of the components, I then get the option on the left hand side to select a new texture for this particular item. So you'll see then the texture is overridden even when we've got a fixed texture on a material. What I can do is if I need to remove that texture, I can go onto part level. So if I go to top and head through to properties and overrides, we'll see that we've got a texture override in there, so I can remove that one. And if I want to set the textures individually on each face, what I can do is click on finish, and then from here I can select the texture, and what this will do is add an individual override for each edge type, whether it's the face, back, the edge or the end of the material. Now when we've got automatic textures applied like our assembly on the right hand side, things are a little bit different because we can assign the texture from the job level if you like. So what I can do with this is if I go to properties for a second, add into room, when I'm initially starting my job with an automatic material, what I would do is I'd be selecting a finished texture. So if I go to finishes, I'd be selecting a finished texture for my interior and exterior from here. Now we can also modify the texture. If I just cancel this out and we click on textures from 3D view, we can also specify the texture that we want to use for our automatic assembly from here as well. And if we want to, we can also go down to assembly level. And if I just go to edit and then go into section view, properties and finish, and then we can modify it for this one assembly. So then we can select the interior texture and exterior texture. Again, this will just apply to the single assembly. Now what I can also do with automatic mode, if I go back to 3D, and what's really cool is I can just pick on this complete assembly. And then from here, I can then select an exterior texture and an interior texture. So I'm just going to change that to be something completely different. I'll go with the ash that I've got here. And as you can see from 3D, then my texture will then update for my assembly. This also works if we've got the doors made from a material that's also set to automatic as well. Hopefully you found this episode useful. Feel free to give it a like, share and subscribe. We're also on Facebook, that's facebook.com/thecabinetvisionguy, and Instagram too, that's instagram.com/thecabinetvisionguy. Cheers!